Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're continuing our study of the Gospel of Matthew today, and we're in chapter 17, verse 1. And we're going to read through verse 13, and this is the account of the transfiguration of Jesus. 6 days later than Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." 6 days after, he said, "If you come after me, you must take up your cross and follow me." 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother, and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. And Peter answered and said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 booths, tabernacles, here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Hear him." And when the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were much afraid. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, "Arise, and do not be afraid." And lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And as they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, "Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." And his disciples asked him, saying, "Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" Of course, the scribes didn't just say that. That's prophecy from the book of Malachi. It's the very last prophecy of the Old Testament. He answered and said, "Elijah is coming and will restore all things. I say to you, Elijah already came, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they wished. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." And the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. There's so much in this event. Mostly just it's a dazzling thing to try to imagine visually in your mind. It connects with something that happens in the first chapter of the book of Revelation, when John was there on the Mount of Transfiguration. Gets to see Jesus in his resurrection body, his glorified state. And it is very much like what is described here, but more. And in that instance, he falls down as dead, and Jesus lifts him back up. And just like here, where did this take place? Well, they haven't come south yet. They're still in the north. There is speculation that the likely mountain would be Mount Hermon. And if that is the case, and they are near the pinnacle of Mount Hermon, they would be in the snow at this point, which is something interesting to think about. Jesus becomes transformed. He becomes in some way different, filled with something of what he emptied himself of. Something of his heavenly state, something of his divine existence. He's given this respite, this moment, this brief moment of a reminder of home being heaven for him, before he makes his way to Jerusalem, because this is the end of the Galilean ministry. He's coming down to Jerusalem after this. And Moses and Elijah are there. Why are they there? Well, the most obvious reason is that they represent the law and the prophets. But they also knew something of the stress that Jesus was enduring in their own way. Moses, the leader of a people that was obstinate and obtuse as he led them through the wilderness. Jesus is experiencing that at this moment in his ministry. And he's going to experience it again when he comes down from the mountain. Elijah, of course, was persecuted, and it's also interesting that both of these men, these are the 3 men in the Bible that fasted for 40 days. Moses when he was on the mountain, Jesus when he was in the wilderness. Elijah when he fled to Mount Sinai. And all three of them have unique circumstances surrounding their deaths. Elijah did not die, but was taken up into heaven. Moses died with God alone, and God alone buried him. And of course, Jesus was raised from the dead on the third day and ascended to heaven. It's always intrigued me that they knew it was Moses and Elijah. They never seen their likenesses. There were no photographs. They didn't know what Moses and Elijah looked like. And it makes me think that in our heavenly state there are no strangers. As the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, then I will be known even as I am known. Then I will know even as I am known. I don't think that we'll have to introduce ourselves to each other in heaven. I think we'll know each other immediately, the way they immediately knew this was Moses and Elijah. Peter, as he always does, not always does, but as he often does, misspeaks. And before he even gets the words finished, God interrupts him and says, no, and this is important as well. You have represented the law and the prophets in Moses and Elijah. And God said, no, you listen to my son. You listen to Jesus. As they're going down from the mountain, Jesus says to them, they ask about Elijah coming. And I guess they hadn't understood that Elijah had already come, or because they're sure that Jesus is the Messiah. But the scribes have taught us from the prophets that Elijah is coming first. And he says Elijah did come, and they didn't recognize him, and they treated him the way they wanted to. And without him explaining this to them, they start to understand. They understood that he was talking about John the Baptist. And that in itself is encouraging, at least for these three that are always with Jesus, even when no one else is. They're the three that he takes into the deep part of the Garden of Gethsemane. They're the three that he took with him to raise Jairus' daughter. They're the three who are with him on the Mount of Transfiguration. James will be the first apostle to die, other than Judas, of course. John will be the last. And Peter will die in the 60s, about the same time the Apostle Paul does in Rome, as part of Nero's persecution. Well, this is an event that's recorded not only in the Synoptic Gospels, but in John as well. And we're going to pick up with what happens when he came down the mountain next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.